example, when you read in the book of Acts and you see what all the things they were doing, those were highlights. And sometimes you read one part and then you read the next part and you don't hear the 5 years in between, in and out of jail, the washing of the laundry, the caring for other people's kids, or the time when Paul was on a donkey and he fell off and got kicked in the head. You don't hear half the stories, more than half. You just get the highlights when we read the book of Acts. Our next point in missions work is this. We usually hear of highlights. This is something else that came to mind as I was pondering missions, pondering Thanksgiving, how they go together. When we think of missions, usually we think of highlights. But the truth is, much of missions actually happens in the lowlights, behind the scenes. When we read the book of Acts, we get excited. We see all the amazing things that the apostles were doing and the early disciples, all this great stuff going on. And wow, it's just so amazing. And then when you go to the mission field and you experience a short-term trip, like you come with PMC for the summer, 10 days, very intense, full day. You don't even know how to brush your teeth anymore because it's nonstop, go, go, go. And people are getting evangelized all over the place, and it's fantastic, very exciting. You go home and you tell the highlights. You talk about all that you did. And then you crash and sleep for about a week because you're probably exhausted, or you try to get back to school and work and you're dizzy and having to take double coffees and stuff like that. So we usually hear the highlights, but the reality is on the mission field, much of it happens in the lowlights. And what we mean by that is when you read about the Apostle Paul, for example, when you read in the book of Acts and you see what all the things they were doing, those were highlights. And sometimes you read one part and then you read the next part and you don't hear the 5 years in between, in and out of jail, the washing of the laundry, the caring for other people's kids, or the time when Paul was on a donkey and he fell off and got kicked in the head. You don't hear half the stories, more than half. You just get the highlights when we read the book of Acts. And the same is true probably for all missionaries all over the place today and throughout all of history. We usually get the highlights when we read about missionaries. Sometimes we hear about C.T. Studd, this famous missionary from the past, and he was a get-her-done kind of guy and was just amazing and got so much done. And then it's not often, though, that we hear I wouldn't call these the lowlights, but these are the other side of the story that often gets forgotten, how he would be so aggressive, so fixed on getting so much done that his own family didn't like him anymore and disowned him. Bad problems there. And then he actually became addicted to morphine because he had an ailment and he had to get morphine because it was so painful. And then he could never stop for the rest of his life taking morphine. He was addicted to it. We don't hear those kind of stories about the missionaries. I wouldn't call those the lowlights, but those are that's just another part of the story that we don't get. But in any case, highlights are one thing when it comes to missions, thankfulness. But much of the real missions happens actually in the lowlights, in the everyday plodding along. And we'll see that in our next point. So missions work, thinking of Thanksgiving, long-lasting success comes through faithful plodding forward. Long-lasting success in missions work, we need to be mindful of this, actually comes through faithful plodding along, plodding forward. And then we think of harvesting, we think of those highlights. That would be the harvest. We hear about all these people that got saved and all these churches that got started. We hear these things. But there's also, on the flip side of harvesting, is the sowing. Before all that harvest comes in and all those big numbers of converts and churches, what no one seems to tell the story is also the years and years of sowing the gospel that came before that missionary. And we read this in Scripture that you'll reap from the labor of others that have gone before you. It's a very true thing. A lot of our labor, we don't see the fruit now, but someone else will see it. We can be sure of that. And a lot of the fruit that we see now, the harvesting we bring in, was a labor from is a harvest we're getting from somebody else's labor. That's just true in so many areas of life and of ministry. But in any case, in missions work, thankfulness, I'm not sure how I made this connection actually as I think about it, but I'm sure it'll maybe make sense in the next slide. Long-lasting success, though, comes through faithful plodding forward, and then harvesting and sowing are laborious. Thank you for watching this highlight of Missions Incorporated, the podcast of Practical Missions Cohort. If you've been encouraged or blessed, we encourage you to like it or share it or subscribe to our channel. This helps others to learn about the ministry and the different ways that they can get involved here in the country of Italy. And if you or your church would like to know more about how to personally get involved and impact Italy for the gospel, visit practicalmissions.org.